Hi, this is Sean from Centric Wealth Advisory. This is the third part of the retirement planning calculator template that I'm going through. We first established what the retirement goals were for Joe Soap. In the second video, we looked at the step of looking at his current provisions. In this case, Joe Soap has a retirement annuity and a unit trust. We went through that video where we first excluded the unit trust from the retirement funds. But then we looked at taking a 1/3 commutation from the retirement annuity as a lump sum and a balance of 66.67% going into a living annuity. This video is now going to show you the impact of that decision and also using the default weighting, which we've already established in the current provisions over here. We said the weighting was 71.29. And the provisions currently is 52,308,682. And this is the weighting. That 71 and 29 is weighting on the income, which is 305. The 305 is already derived over here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the two types of funds and how the money is going to be drawn down and how long the money is going to last. So first I'm going to start off with compulsory funds. This is a living annuity, which means that you are restricted between the 2.5% and 7.5% drawdown per year. And once you've reached the 17.5%, you cannot draw any further. So that's a bit of a limitation. And the reason for this is because once you reach your 17.5%, your money has to prolong and not drop to naught, which we will show you on the voluntary graph. So the first one I'm going to show you here is the fund value from the retirement annuity after taking the 1/3, which we've already established is over here, 37 over there. This 217 is the weighted 79% of the 305. And we're going to use a 45% average tax rate at this stage. He's 65 years of age, 6% escalation of his income, which is taken from the retirement goal over here. We've not factored in fees, but if we were to factor in fees, let's say we're putting 0.5%, obviously it'll rebalance the calculations and pull through over here. But for now, I'm not going to. That's something you can play around with in your own time. But for now, we're going to say it's got 0 upfront, 0 ongoing, 45% marginal tax rate at this stage. So it's going to be drawing 217,000, which times by 12 is 2.6 million. The starting amount is 37.2 million. If you add these two together, there's your 216, which means that this is the amount of tax he's paying. This is the amount he's getting after tax. And if you divide that by 12, it's the 2 months over here. Here's the remaining capital after deducting the income and getting the 12% compound return. That's the fund balance at the end of the year, which goes into the next, which is age 66. So in the first year drawdown is 70%. But because he is now escalating at 6%, he will gradually increase his drawdown relative to the growth of the funds, and he will reach his maximum drawdown at 85. Now, we've reestablished he needs to have the money last 25 years, which means he'll be 90 when Joe is expecting to deplete the funds. But because he's now reaching 17.5%, his income in real terms is going to reduce because it's not increasing at the 6% as it should, because it is limited to 17.5%, which in layman's terms, let's put it this way, in today's terms, let's say you are 85 years old and you've got a pension now of 25,000. That's now at 17.5%. Next year, because of inflation, that needs to be 27,000 as an example. But because it's 17.5%, it actually drops down to 24,400. And the year after, it does it again, does it again, does it again. And the reason for this is because your balance is reducing. Now, if you use a full table, you can actually see how far into the future his income actually goes. As you can see here, even after 135 years of age, he'll still have a very small little pension. Obviously, I don't think Joe will be around at that stage, but that's not the point. The point being is that he'll have income last until he's 90 and beyond, but it'll not be relative to real terms in terms of will he have enough relative to the cost of living at in this case, age 85, 86 onward. Now, this is not a terrible scenario because he's got 5 years of provisions, which he needs to make provisions for in this particular case with his retirement annuity. With his voluntary money, we're taking the 15 million future value, the 29%, which is 87,000, really established, is over here. And we're now drawing down 7% as well, 6% escalation, 12% growth, obviously age 65, 45% marginal tax rate. And this is the same calculation, taking the 50 million starting value, 1 million, which is that times 12. This is the two amounts added together. It gives you to your 1052, which is there. Remaining capital, minusing that, plus the 12% growth. That's the balance going to the next year. This is the amount before and after. However, there's no restriction between 2.5% and 17.5%, which means that this can go straight to naught, which it does when he is 90. So this actually works out just fine, funny enough. This calculation means that his money in his voluntary or unit trust will run out when he is expected to die, which is 90. This actually is almost spot on. And because there's no restriction between 17.5%, this is increasing with inflation. This is increasing with inflation up until 85. So in comparison, now we can look at this tab and see this is how it's modeled. As you can see, because it's the 17.5% maximum drawdown, his money is lasting a lot longer, where in this case, it actually depletes when he's 90. So the voluntary money works just fine. Compulsory, not so much. It's got a 5-year gap, which I'll show you now mathematically. This is what happens when you combine the two. This is what the graph looks like. If you take from his age 65, and you take the voluntary and compulsory money and you add those together, you can see the amounts over there. Here it is tabularized over here. So 305 is the total. This is the breakdown. You can see where it says in line. It means that these two amounts added together, this equals that. And it'll continue to do so up until the age of 85. And the reason why we've already said that it's not in line, because we've already established he's maxed out at 17.5%, which means that you'll have a 35,000 Rand difference in future value from 85, 86 would be 127,000. And this is per month, just by the way, this is per month, 218 through 8, because this is what the amount needs to be per month adjusted by inflation, because that's the amount starting off, and this is escalating at 6%. So by the time it gets to 90, his income per month, which I know looks ridiculous, is 1.31 million when he's at 90. And that's just because of the inflation rate. So if you were to go and change the inflation rate here and say it was 4%, go back over here, you would have provisions. And that's just because we're not increasing it in line with what we would receive as inflation. So going back to what I said before, having a goal and understanding it is very important. In this case, he's got 5 years of provisions, which he doesn't have. And obviously, when we discount it back to present terms, this is what it would be in present terms. 10,000 and just times that by 12. So this just gives you, we've discounted back to present, but it's not really important to note. This is really what's important to note, is that he's going to have 5 years of shortfalls because he's maxing out his 17.5%. So yes, his capital is going to last longer than his 90, but in real terms, he's going to have that income reducing because it is capped at 17.5%. So what is the solution? The solution would be to potentially get a higher return. Let's say, let's go to current provisions now, and let's say, well, working on that scenario, we take more risk and say we get you a 10% return on your money. How would that look? As you can see over there, he would have provision. So the first thing one could do is look at maybe taking on more risk. Just remember 8% after fees. That would be like a CPR plus 3, CPR plus 4 fund, depending on the fee structure you've got. Obviously, that's also quite important. But growth is is crucial. Just bearing in mind also, I've not factored in these into this model. This is purely just to show you without putting in costs of running it in terms of advisory fees, etc., because it does complicate it even further. But on face value, between 85 and 90, he needs to make provisions for that, either by making further contributions. So the first thing you could do is, let's say, put 25, 20, oh, we'll get to recommendations, but just in face value, just like 25,000. And you'll then have provisions exactly till 90. So that was just additional 5,000. Obviously, that's a lot of money to put away for the next few decades, because that's between now and retirement, which is 23 years. That's a lot, to be honest. But as you can see, the 17.5% is after he turns 90. So that actually was, without going to recommendations, that would have been the solution. Just increase your one of two things: get a higher return on your investment, or two, increase your contributions towards your retirement funds. Zoom in there a bit, you can see what I mean. So I'm going to put it back on the 20,000, because I want to show you in the last video the recommendations. But this is a unique tool, because not many calculators will illustrate this. They will say to you, going back over here with your current provisions, on face value, you have 52 million, you needed 51, you've got a surplus, you don't need to make any more provisions towards your retirement. But in reality, because we've now looked at each of these graphs individually and modeled it out using this table, we can see that in real terms, when you're taking in the consideration of inflation, the cost of living from between 85 and 90, it does have a bit of a shortfall. So now I'm going to go into the last step, which is the recommendations, how one can get around that. But this is just to illustrate to you between compulsory and voluntary funds, and you can decide to change your weighting. You can change the weighting to, it's just going to put it in as, instead of using 71, 79, you put in 60, 40, and we then go and change the weighting to earn defaulting. It'll automatically update this for you. How would it look? Now we can see the situation is actually a lot worse. That decision was a bad one, because now you've got a short from 80 to 90, so it's 10 years. So it's not great. So let's go back, put it onto default over here, and then you can see and model it out based on that. So this is, again, something you can use as a tool, because when you get to retirement, you need to know how to model this to understand the difference between the two when you get to retirement. You don't want to get to a situation where you've depleted all your voluntary funds and now you have to rely on your compulsory. So let's go back to that situation and make it 80-20 and see what happens if I go and put in own weighting. Okay, also that's not a bad decision there. My bad. So now let's go and put in 50-50. I know this is probably a terrible one. Let's have a look. Yeah, terrible. So let's just go back to default. Default weighting. And leave it on that. And then we'll go to the last video, which is the recommendations, which I will go through with you. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I will see you soon on the last video, which is the recommendations.